What's up, guys? Welcome into Dog Central live on a Thursday night. We are slowly creeping our way through summer. We are here on 7-Eleven day, July 11th. And look, I know it's July. I know it's really hot outside. If you're in the South, I know it's really humid outside. But I'm getting on a plane in a couple days and I'm going to Dallas, Texas, and we're going to have SEC Media Days. And to me, that always has kind of felt like the unofficial official start of college football season. So really excited to have that on the horizon. Fall camps are really just a couple weeks away now, and this is going to be an exciting season. 12-team playoff, Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC, all sorts of conference realignment, lots of good stuff on the horizon. Before we get to all that, we got other stuff to get to tonight. We are going to talk about the latest and greatest and maybe not so greatest going ons in the UGA football and college football universe. Got some questions from all of our loyal Dog Central subscribers, as always. Just want to thank you guys for your support. We couldn't do this without you. Job without you. Getting to do this is a pleasure and a joy, and can't wait to run through another college football season with you guys. All right, let's get. I've always been a big bad news first kind of guy, so let's jump into it because one of you on the forum asked a question, and I probably would have talked about this either way, but we got one from Modoc Wally. It says, what on God's green earth can be done about the driving issues with these players? I understand they're all young, but after literal years of this being an issue with the team, it seems like we haven't found a way around this. Do you believe this really isn't that bad and media is drumming it up because, quote, LOL, UGA players drive bad? Or has the program not done enough to discourage this? I think it's a good question. I think it's a fair question. I'll be honest with you guys. There's part of me that looks at this and says, like, just from a brand awareness standpoint, if you're a football player at Georgia right now, you've got to know I can't get caught, with excessive speeding, and I certainly can't get charged with, street racing, which is what Smile Mondin and DeMello Jones got charged with here earlier in the week. Like, the headline that came up earlier today where it says Bo Hughley is arrested for reckless driving. He got in a single car accident on campus and he left his lane and, obviously wasn't intoxicated or anything like that. I don't know when the crash occurred, but it's like, to me, that is just a life circumstance that happens. Like, people get in car accidents, they get in single car accidents. I will say, like, when you see the reckless driving charge, it is not always a situation where you have a guy that's going, 120 miles an hour down the freeway and people are just like, he's flying by people and people are in danger or anything like that. Like, sometimes these reckless driving charges are as simple as Socobe White's earlier, I believe this spring, where, he turned the wrong way down a one-way street in downtown Athens. He was not under the influence of anything. Like, it was just a kid making a mistake, probably on a busy street. He didn't hit anybody. Like, I think that is overblown. Personally, like, I don't think that's a big deal. I don't really think that's news, honestly. I think the thing that is frustrating if you're a Georgia fan is look, what happened in January of 2022 on the night of the national championship celebration parade is still, I think, a massive, like, scar on, that lingers over things. There are still a lot of guys in this program who played with Devin Willock and know Chandler LaCroix and like, these are people who a lot of these guys knew and loved, and seeing the street racing charge, I think, like, there is a natural response that you have to that, and I think it's fair to have that. The other side of this coin is that I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Like, I was 21 once, 22, 19, whatever age you want to pick. And look, what what some of these guys have done behind the wheel in recent years is dangerous, and there's no disputing that. I also understand and remember a time in my life where like the idea of danger and what qualified as danger was very different at maybe 20 than it is now at 35 years old. So I don't think that it's really fair necessarily to make a moral, judgment on any of this. Like, I do think that it's just one of those things where Georgia has to look at the situation and say, every time this happens, it's going to be shared endlessly on the internet. There's going to be jokes made about it. Some of them are going to be in extremely poor taste. Like, it is going to just rehash and bring everything back up again. And we've got to be smart enough as a program to just chill, to have a few years or a couple years at least of no bad driving incidents. And I think for Georgia moving into, fall camp and all that, like, look, they've had, I think, 4 guys charged with vehicle related incidents this offseason. I'll say that, you would prefer it to be 0, but it's not like we're talking about there's, 20% of the program out there. But I believe, my understanding is that the charge with Mondin and DeMello Jones was that they were sitting at a stoplight on Broad Street and they were next to each other. And when the light turned green, they both kind of like spun their tires. And I think if anything is disappointing about it, it's that, Mondin wouldn't have been arrested. And honestly, this wouldn't have probably been any sort of news if he hadn't lied to the cops and said that he didn't know the guy in the other car. It sounds like DeMello Jones was cooperative with the police, and because of that, he wasn't arrested. I think it's just one of those things where it's going to feel bad, it's going to look bad, and it should. And also, the other side of this coin is that you're talking about charges that had a $26 bond. You're talking about misdemeanor charges, and I do think that there are certain people that like are a little bit too dramatic about some of these things that are going on, in the sense of like, this is not a violent crime, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Does it need to stop? Is it dangerous? Yes, absolutely. I'm not arguing against that, but I also think some perspective needs to be kept. Now, the question, really the good question here is, what does Georgia do about these driving issues? How do they get rid of this? How do they get this out of their program? Look, these cars, my guess is, I'm not reporting any news here. I want to be clear, but my guess is that, these cars, this 2021 Pan American Porsche that Jones is driving, and this 2022 Dodge Charger or Challenger that Mondin was driving, like that vehicle was probably bought with some sort of NIL money, or maybe an NIL deal with a car dealership or something on that level. But look, we are moving into a spot where NIL is going to come in-house, and the NIL that's going to go out to these kids is going to be revenue, athletic department revenue that is going to be shared. And I don't really have a problem with if you get caught doing something stupid that you shouldn't be doing, especially if you get caught lying to the police after doing that thing. Find them, appropriately for their, depending on what their NIL situation is. But maybe, having a fine where you can't make that car payment, or all of a sudden you're having to find a way to make that car payment out of pocket, is a good way to deter this behavior. Now, I want to be clear that from a Georgia administration standpoint, they have taken this issue very seriously. I don't know that they can take this issue much more seriously. Like Kirby Smart, back last spring, in a few months, like spring of 2023, a few months after Devin Willick and Chandler LaCroix's accident and deaths, like he gathered his team up before spring break and begged them, like, do not get behind the wheel of a car. If you have been drinking, if you're of legal drinking age and you go out and drink, do not get behind the wheel of a car. Do not get behind the wheel of a car that somebody who has been drinking or doing anything is driving. Like, the loss of life that occurred in this program, it's still there. Like it still lingers with a lot of people. They're still sad about it. They are still, mourning Devin Willock. They're still mourning Chandler LaCroix, excuse me. It's not like this has just been dismissed or thrown under the rug. So I have a hard time taking this as, this is indicative of Kirby Smart's leadership or whatever. But at the same time, the results are the results. And the result is that these incidents continue to happen. Maybe they're not happening with the same frequency as they once were, and that's a good thing, but they've got to get this out of their program, almost entirely if they can. I don't know if that'll ever happen because Athens is a town with a lot of cops in it, and college football players are going to continue to make a lot of money, and a lot of them are going to continue to use that money to buy really nice cars that go really fast, and they're going to want to drive those cars fast. But it's just the problem now is that a speeding ticket is not just a speeding ticket, or a reckless driving charge that's, a $26 bail is not just a reckless driving charge, because it has become emblematic of a tragedy. And, I think in order to really move on and heal from that tragedy in an appropriate way, they got to stop having these types of incidents. So I know that's not the fun thing to talk about, or maybe the thing that everybody, I'm here to open the show with, but I'm not gonna ignore the elephant in the room. Like this is a big offseason storyline, and it's worth discussing. And I think that whatever is happening right now is not working. And Kirby Smart, his staff, the people in the administration, whoever is in charge of fixing this problem, like they got to find a more creative solution than, hey, be afraid for your, you should be afraid for your life, so you shouldn't be doing this. Because the reality is that most 20-year-olds, they don't have a proper fear gene yet. It hasn't really been developed on the level that it should, even after the tragedy that they've seen. Like, it's always a question of, there's always that voice of, that won't happen to me, or I'm different. So it's time to figure out something. Maybe money can be a motivator there. All right. We have a question here from Brendan McGlynn. Thank you, Brendan. Do you think Arion Smith will ever reach his full potential with all that speed he has? I've always been rooting for him. Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting what ifs of Georgia's 2024 season, honestly, is like you brought in Colby Young, you have Ra Thomas. Him and Carson Beck seem to have kind of developed a trust over this offseason that maybe wasn't fully developed when last season began. You've got, I think, your deepest wide receiver core that Kirby has ever had. You don't have maybe that clear number one like Brock or Ladd was last year, but I think like you've got a bunch of dudes that all can threaten the defense, and all of them, if you leave them in a one-on-one situation, can beat you and score a touchdown. So the interesting question becomes, right? Like, how many? I look at football like this, where, you have 11 defenders and you have 11 offensive players, and it's almost like a chessboard, right? Where, somewhere down the line, maybe the defense's number one corner can shut down your number one wide receiver. But if that number 4 or number 5 target on that play is better than that number 4 or number 5 DB, then it doesn't matter what, the first, second, and third corners did to the first, second, and third wide receivers. That's football. Like you have to take care of everybody on every snap. And so looking at Arion's career, I think the interesting thing is that in a lot of ways, he's kind of played some of his best football in Georgia's biggest games, right? Like you go back last season, he didn't have a catch from week 4 through week 12, had a couple against Georgia Tech, and then has the 51-yarder against Alabama. I think coming into last season, especially with the injuries that Georgia was dealing with at receiver, they had a little bit of like a feeling like we're going to use this early part of the year to give Arion a chance to really show out and get comfortable. And he was one of the starting wide receivers, I think, in week 1 when they played UT Martin. He had 5 targets in that game and had 0 receptions. And from that point on, it was like a little bit downhill from his, in terms of his usage rate. He played 27 pass snaps in week 1. Never played that many again the rest of the year. Only eclipsed 20 one other time, and that was in week 2. So he definitely kind of got put on the shelf, but it's also, don't know that was really, anyone's fault but his own. To be truthful, he had 3 drops on 20 targets last year. That's a drop percentage of 27.3% on, on target passes, and he had 8 catches on those 20 targets. Like, anytime you have a receiver who's more of a vertical threat or like a big play kind of target like that, it's going to be fair to kind of judge their target to reception ratio a little bit differently, because trying to throw the ball 30 to 40 yards downfield to a streaking wideout is often a much more low percentage play than, hitting a guy on a slant. But at the same time, Georgia's got too many guys who are good in their offense and who will catch a ball if they can get their hands on it, to put targets into a guy who you're not sure you can rely on. So I think fall camp is huge for him. I also think that, to be fair, last year, the build up to the 2023 season was really the first time in his college football career where, he went through a normal spring and a normal fall offseason. And so in a lot of ways, I know that he's been around a long time, but in a lot of ways, all he was ever asked to do was just to go be fast and run straight. And I think that's great that he's got that explosiveness, but if the guy could just develop like 1 or 2 other routes that he's reliable on, just a slant and a stick route or something like that, where DBs had to play him a little bit more honestly, and instead of giving him a ton of cushion, he could become a very dangerous weapon. The other thing I've always wondered about with Arion, truthfully, is just why we don't see him in the slot more to this point in his career. He's only taken 25% of his snaps out of the slot. I know that he wants to be an outside receiver and all that. And, he's not the biggest guy, but like with his speed, you would think there should be some scenarios where you can kind of work him over the middle and boom, he can split some safeties. Or if the defense is in cover 1 or playing a little more aggressive, like he should be able to kind of make one man miss and go to the house. I don't know what the story is going to be for him in 2024. I don't know what to think, honestly. I think he had a good spring. I know that he had a good spring from people that I talked to, but at the same time, I am still curious, how this will pan out. But I will say that he stayed at Georgia for a reason. And if Georgia didn't believe that he could be a significant contributor for them, they would have been honest with him and told him that. Like, nobody's trying to trap him in Athens. And as I believe a grad transfer, he could have even transferred within the SEC if he wanted to without any restrictions. So the fact that he's there, I think, says that there's still a belief and a chance that he is able to kind of become that guy. I don't know that he'll ever be a guy where, he comes out and catches 5 or 6 balls every week, but if he can give you, 1 reception a half, probably one of those 2 receptions is going to be a big play in any given game. So it'll be interesting to watch him in 2024. And he's a guy that, like, I could see creeping out on the field against Clemson and, late in the second quarter when Georgia's on a drive and kind of has them off balance a little bit. And all of a sudden, boom, he explodes past some slot corner and it's 6. Like, that's the intriguing part about him, is he has always got the potential to make a big play. All right. Good question about Missouri here, and some good fact finding. This is from Modoc Wally. He said, this time last year, I think many expected 2023 to be Drinkwitz's swan song. Decent recruiting, but no results and no indication the upcoming year was going to be any different. Not only did he turn it around in a big way, he cranked up Mizzou's recruiting successes and is now responsible for 3 of Missouri's top 6 all-time recruits per 24/7. Do we think he's figured something out and this is the beginning of Mizzou becoming a fixture in the mid-upper tier of the SEC? Or was last year likely just an outlier and the recruiting will level off once the other states add legislation that makes Missouri's NIL advantages not so unique? Really good question and really thoughtful question. Appreciate you you asking that. I think what I look at first with Missouri, I know that a lot of people kind of expected them to be whatever. One of my good preseason. We always like highlight our good preseason predictions and kind of forget about our bad ones, right? But one of the decent preseason predictions that I had last year was I did pick Washington to make the playoff, and I picked Mizzou. I voted for them to be third in the SEC East at SEC Media Days. Obviously, they exceeded that. They were second. I did not think that they would, win 11 games and beat Ohio State at the end of the season, but I did think they'd be pretty good. And the reason why I thought they'd be pretty good was because just what they had on their infrastructure. They had Darius Robinson, the defensive end, that was a first rounder. They had Enos Rakestraw and Abrams Drain, two really good, big, long boundary corners. They had Jalen Carly, who was kind of a hybrid type defender, but also could hold his own in pass coverage. And they had an NFL tackle in Javon Foster, and they had Tyron Hopper, who was a Georgia kid at linebacker. Like, that defense had dudes at all three levels, multiple of them. And I know that they do get some decent production back, right? But I also ask myself when I see I've seen some lists lately where Brady Cook was listed as the number one quarterback in the SEC, which is bizarre. I've also seen some people being like, Missouri's a kind of not a playoff lock, but Missouri, is kind of being talked about like they're going to go to the CFP for sure. Like, there's no question about it. They do have a favorable schedule, but that was a program that had three guys drafted total in 2022 and 2023. And one of them was a Caleb Evans, who was a transfer from, I believe, Tulsa, and only was there for a season. So they really developed internally two draft picks in the two draft cycles prior to last season's. You look at that, and my question is, yes, Drinkwitz has improved Missouri's recruiting, but has he improved it enough to replace, a tackle that was really good? All these players that we were talking about. And I think people make a mistake this time of year in college football, and they say, I recognize this quarterback. Oh, and this Luther Burden guy, he's pretty good. I recognize that wide receiver. He was a 5-star recruit. He led the SEC in yards after the catch last year. They got both those guys back. Sick. I'm in. That also forgets that they lost Cody Schrader, who was about as good at running stretch zone in the SEC as anybody that I've seen in a very long time. And that is exactly what Drinkwitz loves to do. I know they got some other transfer running backs, but it's not just something that you replace every day in terms of having an all-American level running back on your roster. I thought that kid was phenomenal. And if anything, being kind of more of a slight sized guy helped him hide behind those big offensive linemen like Javon Foster. Brady Cook is a good player. He's not a great player. And he took 24 sacks last year, even with two offensive tackles that I thought they were in the conversation for the best pair of left and right tackle in the SEC. So do I think that they're going to just chug along and not fall off? I find that hard to believe. And I think that if you look at Missouri's recruiting over the last couple of years, and I mean, even this year will kind of mirror that. When Missouri landed Matt Zollers, I thought this was interesting. When they had Missouri, when they had Matt Zollers commit to them, the 5-star quarterback who did commit to them over Georgia, tremendous recruiting win for Eli Drinkwitz and his crew. No doubt about that, right? Also, they have kind of, to this point, 2025 is not wrapped up yet. And right now they're 13th in the nation for their 2025 class, 6th in the SEC right now if the recruiting cycle ended today, which it does not. But last year they were 12th in the SEC in recruiting. Their classes have been pretty damn top heavy, and they go and sign, a 5-star like Zollers, or they got Williams Nwaneri last year in the 2024 cycle. in, I think, was it 2023 they got Burton? No, 2022 they got Burton. Like, getting those big names does give them star power. And if those 5 stars hit, they are guys that can go out and, they can, like Luther Burden can go out and win one-on-one against the best corner at Georgia on certain snaps at key junctures of the game. But I also I don't know if they'll be able to replace what they had on the offensive line entirely, because that offensive line was good. And I just think that their recruiting philosophy right now is like, they hit some home runs and they hit some singles. You don't really see enough doubles, in my opinion. That might change with this 2025 class, and they're doing a good job of capitalizing on the success of last year. But how will that class pan out if they don't live up to expectations? And if we get to October and they got a loss or two more than people projected? You look at their schedule for this year, and it is pretty favorable, in my opinion. But it's not not a total cakewalk. Like, they should start out 3-0 against Buffalo, Boston College, and Vandy, but they go to Texas A&M. I think that Texas A&M is getting kind of overlooked. They might be shockingly competent under Mike Elko. They host Auburn at home, which, like, I know that, look, Peyton Thorne, I'm not sure about either. There's things about Auburn I'm not sure about. That's still a blue chip ratio roster going up against Missouri. They got to go to Alabama. They got to play Oklahoma at home as well. They even go to South Carolina in November, which obviously I would expect them to win that game. But when you're talking about talent level, it's not that different. And then they get Arkansas at the end of the year, which that game, is kind of that can be a weird series historically. So do I think that Drinkwitz has done a really good job of building something that people have gotten behind? Yeah, absolutely. Am I positive that that's like sustainable? I think that they have probably firmly put themselves into the kind of mid tier of the SEC, but I don't know that we're going to see them winning 10 games, every other year or anything like that. Like, I think that they could get there. At this moment, though, I am still just kind of curious to see, like, what happens after the big year. There's a lot of teams that have one really big year that's great. I'm curious to see, is there some sustainability here, or how does it go? But I do think Drinkwitz is there to stay. And I think Missouri is a little bit underrated as a high school football state. There's a lot of talent that comes out of that state, even, outside of just the St. Louis area. There's a lot of talent that comes out of that state. And I also think that, you look at what Gary Pinkel did up there, probably one of the more underrated coaching tenures of the last 50 years in college football, right? Like, you had a team there that was consistently competitive in both the Big 12 and the SEC, and really was knocking on the door of a national championship back in 2007. I think that they can be very good. I don't know if the ceiling for them is ever really going to be at the level of, those kind of top 4 or 5. Like, it's lower than it is at Georgia. It's lower than it is at Alabama. It's lower than it is at Texas. It's lower than it is at Oklahoma. It's lower than it is at LSU. Maybe equal to Auburn, but, like, we're not talking about, I think Tennessee's a higher ceiling program as well. Like, there's a lot of good programs in the SEC, and that's the hard part about it, is you can be doing a really good job in this league and still not really be, up there at the top at this point. All right, moving forward. Do you think Dwight Phillips will return kicks this year or otherwise see the field? Hard to say at this point. This is from Michael. Hard to say at this point, Michael, just because of the fact that he was not an early enrollee. So he's, Georgia really hasn't gotten him into an actual practice yet. I know he's on campus and, working out with teammates and doing player-led kind of pass skeleton drills and stuff like that. But at this point, I would be it would be dishonest for me to give you an answer there and pretend like I know exactly what's going to play out. You also asked, how much do you expect Colby Young to play? How does his speed compare to Georgia's other wide receivers? Good question. And I think the answer might be best explained this way. So we go to 2025, or I'm sorry, 2023. Good Lord, my mind is all over the place. If you go back and look at 2023 Georgia, right, and you look at their receiving and kind of how that room functioned, and not just 2023 Georgia, you go to 2022, even really all of 2021 as well, because you had Georgia has not had a true, in my opinion, a true X receiver emerge since George Pickens. They've had some guys who, had nice years. Like Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint was a really good football player for Georgia in 2022 and in 2023, in my opinion. Like probably underrated in a lot of ways. At the same time, they haven't had Ra Thomas was kind of starting to develop into that guy on the outside last year, but got hurt. I think right as things were really right as we were hitting the stretch of the season where Georgia would have started relying on him a lot, he went down, and I think the Alabama game would have been the game where he saw like 7 targets because they had great DBs that it wasn't easy to create separation against, and he would have been that guy where it's like, Carson, we're gonna have to go work some kind of stop fade style routes on the sidelines with Ra. He took 92.9% of his snaps out wide last year, and that was as a true X receiver. But you start going down the list, like Rosemy, he was an outside receiver as well, but like Ladd, even in Georgia's offense, and Dylan Bell, like both those guys playing 78% of their snaps out wide, but they're Z receivers. They're not true X receivers that are those kind of physical 50-50 guys. And, A.D. Mitchell was one of those in 2022. I kind of forgot about him, but Georgia didn't have that last year after Thomas went down. And they really haven't had like 2 of those at the same time that were healthy at any point that I can remember, maybe since like Reggie Brown and Fred Gibson. I don't know. Like, so I look at Ra Thomas coming in here, and I expect to I think you're going to see him a lot. I think you're going to see him in the red zone a whole lot, and I think that you're going to see him, be an important part of this offense. And I also think the same is true with Colby Young coming over from Miami. Like last year at Miami, he was, I think, quietly like really good at Miami in 2023 and 2022. You go back and look, this guy is certainly a true wide out. Like he is a true X receiver, played almost 96% of his snaps out wide. The thing that's underrated about him, in my opinion, is that he does have the ability to do things after the catch, and he has that ability despite being 6'3" and 220. He's big, he's physical, and I think he had the highest contested catch percentage in the ACC last year. Yeah, 18 contested targets, 12 contested catches. That's pretty damn good rate, but along the way, he also forced 10 missed tackles after the catch on his 47 catches last year. To put that in perspective for you guys in terms of like what that looks like compared to Georgia's receiving core last year. The only receiver on Georgia's roster, the only player on Georgia's roster, I should say, last year who forced more than 10 missed tackles after the catch was Brock Bowers with 18. Like, Dejan Edwards had 9 missed tackles forced after the catch. Of course, he was a running back. Ladd McConkey also had 9. Dylan Bell had 6. Delp had 5. Dominic Lovett had 5. You're talking about a guy, I think, who Colby Young, like, as long as he knows the offense and all that, which judging from G-Day, they feel like he does. I think he's going to bully dudes in the red zone. I think he is going to be a really important player for Georgia. And, I think you're going to get to November, December, and he's going to be a guy that NFL scouts are excited about, and that he'll be a draft pick. Like there's not a lot of guys that are running around that are 6'3", 220, have a 40 time that's, certainly sub 4.6. And you look at his career production to this point, last year, 1.79 yards per route run, yards receiving, that is, per route run, and 1.75 yards per route run in 2022. That is knocking on the door of elite. Like my benchmark has always been, you want to see, an elite receiver is going to have over 2.0 yards per route run. Maybe not elite, but a very good receiver. That is the benchmark, in my opinion, for like very high level receiving production. Anything over 2.5 is, you're getting into like really exciting territory. Obviously, that only goes for guys who are playing starter level snaps. If a backup comes in and has 2 receptions on just 10 routes run all year, I'm not talking about that. But like McConkey last year, he was really Georgia's best in that category. He had 3.26 yards per route run, which is insane. But he only, he kind of had all, with the injuries and all that, he only had 148 receiving snaps. So it really wasn't that many. Bowers last year was 2.65, if that is kind of a good example for you guys of, what we're looking at there. But I think Colby Young is going to be a very special player for Georgia. And I mean, just go back in G-Day and look at that catch that he made against Julian Humphrey, and it's pretty special stuff. All right, I'm going to take 1 second here to thank some sponsors. We got to pay our bills. Bills are stressful, but they're good to be paid. Home Field Apparel. It's been really our first sponsor ever for anything Dog Central related, and continues to support us. We will be doing more live events with Home Field this season like we did last year. Looking forward to sharing some other news here shortly about a little project of mine that they're sponsoring. Also excited to have some Creature Comforts beer on board. Creature Comforts is the official craft beer and tap room of University of Georgia Athletics. Obviously, you can get downtown Athens anytime and check out their wonderful location there. They've got an awesome courtyard to come hang out, drink some beers with your friends, family, and get some good food as well, inside or outside. Should be around their neck of the woods some this fall too, doing some things on premise with those guys as well. So want to thank those 2 awesome companies, and encourage you guys to check them out. Honestly, knowing kind of our subscriber base and probably a lot of our audience, many of you are probably already drinking some Creature Comforts beer or wearing some Home Field Apparel clothing. If you would like to go and get yourself a nice, soft, silky smooth Home Field Apparel t-shirt or sweatshirt, the sweatshirts are exquisitely soft. Use code DOGSTPL15. That's DAWGS TPL15 for 15% off on homefieldapparel.com. All right, moving forward. If you're in the chat and you got any questions, fire away. Okay, I'm going to combo these 2 questions from Michael here. So he says, who is our 4th offensive tackle? I'll start there. So I think Georgia's 4th offensive tackle is a guy that you should probably get to know. So I think he's going to be really good. In my opinion, right now you look at Georgia's tackles, I think your clear number 1 is Ernest Green. He's going to play left tackle. Your right tackle is going to be a battle between Xavier Truss and Monroe Freeling. I think that Xavier Truss is a really good player. He's an offensive lineman that continues to develop. I've always thought he's a better guard than a tackle, to be 100% transparent. It's not to say he's not a good tackle, but I've seen him be dominant at stretches at both positions, guard and tackle, in games against, kind of the best edge rushers in college football. I always felt like he sometimes looked a little bit uncomfortable at tackle. Usually looked a little bit more comfortable at guard. I think that for Georgia in 2024, if you're talking about where's the highest ceiling is probably if Monroe Freeling is able to continue to flourish and take over that right tackle job at some point, and Truss can kind of become that like sixth offensive lineman. I'm sure Georgia will, not sure, but I would expect, just considering the way the room looks, that Georgia will probably rotate on the offensive line a good bit again this year. They've done that a lot the last couple of years. They've kind of played 7 guys regularly. We'll see what happens if Freeling is kind of a 2022 Mims style situation early in the year where he sort of comes in on the third series, or how that looks. The other guy, though, that I think that people really need to get to know is Jamal Merriweather, who is an absolute – I mean, look, Georgia recruits a lot of freaks and all of that, but, like, this dude is just from a size standpoint absolutely freaky. I was down on the field before G-Day, even amongst all of these giant humans that are playing offensive line, which, most of them are 6'5", 6'6". Like, he's another inch or two taller than the Freelings and the Ratledges of the world. He's like 6'7" and, probably 330. I don't know exactly what he weighs, but he is big. He is a really big kid. Comes out of Brunswick, Georgia, and probably a little bit overlooked as a recruit. I mean, he was composite ranking. It looks like On3 had him as a 4-star player and the 13th ranked tackle in the country. Rivals didn't even have him ranked nationally or as a tackle. ESPN ranked him as the 42nd best tackle. 24/7 had him the 32nd tackle. So composite-wise, he's the 630th best player in the country and the number 62 ranked player in the state of Georgia. I think that you're talking about a guy who will probably end up being a multi-year starter in the SEC at tackle for Georgia, unless Jazari Jackson just, blows up faster than I expect him to. But he is a really good player. It seemed like he was kind of firmly in the mix as the second team tackle in spring, and also, worked in and took plenty of reps with the first team as well. So Georgia's got another up and coming bright future kind of guy. He reminds me a lot, not necessarily with his style of play, because I just haven't gotten to see him enough in pads and on the field against, real competition, but just story wise, very similar to Warren McClendon, right? Like, South Georgia kid, not super highly ranked as a recruit, but like lots of raw skills, big frame, and came in and, McClendon was obviously a multi-year starter for Georgia and an NFL draft pick. So I expect that Merriweather could kind of follow into that theme as well. We'll see, though. Moving forward here, you also asked, what position group are you most worried about for Georgia? I think, worry is a relative term. With the amount of talent that Georgia recruits, it's hard to really, like, quote unquote, worry about, any position group in particular too much. I think for Georgia, I have a lot of questions about sort of how the depth chart is going to shake out behind the starting secondary in some places, particularly up the middle of that secondary. But it's all about the defensive line for me right now, if you're UGA. That was, I think, the spot last year where they took a bit of a step back, and I think that it showed, right? Like in that Alabama game, it showed they did not have that true zero tech run stopper, like a guy that can play as like an actual nose guard if need be. They have a lot of three technique defensive tackles that are you know in that 300-pound range or 290 or so, and they're athletic and they're good pass rushers, but they just weren't quite good enough in terms of creating penetration and knocking guys back at the snap from the line of scrimmage. And I thought it hurt Georgia's run defense. I thought it really hurt Georgia's linebackers in terms of their ability to defend the run and defend the outside run at that, because they had a hard time seeing things at times. And they, if look, I'm always, there's certain beliefs that I've come to develop when it comes to breaking down games and prognosticating things and putting money on college football games, to be frank. And one of those is that if you look, just go back and look, the best teams, the elite teams, they usually have that game breaker in the middle of the defense. Like, they've got a guy at the defensive tackle spot or in the interior of the defensive line that can force a double team. And if you can get one guy to force a double team, then everybody else gets to work one-on-one, and things start to get really fun for, the other guys. Because you look at Michael Williams, you look at Damon Wilson, you look at Mpemba, you look at Gabe Harris, you look at Ingram Dawkins, like Warren Brinson, Stackhouse. Like, there's all these guys that are super talented, but one of them needs to do the dirty work so that all the rest of them can succeed. That is my opinion. That might be Nas Stackhouse, who I thought looked really good this spring and, looked like he was in great shape and played very fast. Like, can he force some doubles in the middle? Can they get something out of Jamal Jarrett? Like, he's, coming into, his second year in Athens, and he's a 350. I mean, he came in at 350. I think he'll probably play college football around 330, but if they could get 15 snaps a game from that kid, it would change everything, I think, for them in certain scenarios. The other side of this is that Smile Mondin, CJ Allen, two of the best blitzing inside linebackers in the country. Jalen Walker is such a good pass rusher as an inside linebacker that he doesn't even really always play inside linebacker anymore. He lines up an edge a lot on third downs. You've got guys who can come screaming up the A gaps and make life really difficult on quarterbacks. And the smart ones, like we saw this with Kobe Dean at times. And I think CJ Allen is going to end up being a guy like this where, Georgia's inside linebackers on any given pass play, even when they're in coverage, even when they're spies, particularly when they're spies, they have an option where if they see a spot, if they see a hole and they believe that they have a clear path and that they can go and sack the quarterback, they have the option to take off and do that. Now, there's a lot more of those paths that just kind of develop in the middle of a play when you have a big man on the middle that is demanding double teams. And so they get somebody that's forcing double teams on the inside of the defensive line. Those linebackers coming up and blitzing behind them, it is going to be hell on wheels for other offenses. Sacred Grove, really good point. Jordan Hall needs to show why he was a 5-star. I thought he flashed, he was a freshman last year, right? I thought he flashed some good stuff. And by all accounts that I've heard, had a really good offseason, or is having a really good offseason, I should say. I expect him to be a very significant contributor for Georgia this year. He's already a very good, kind of pass rusher. I think if he starts getting a little more dominant as a run stopper, then he could become a 3-down type player for Georgia. Kristen Miller, I thought pretty good against the run last year. Flashed at times against the pass, but not nearly enough consistent. You've got all these guys kind of in your pipeline, so to speak, and it's just going to be interesting to see, because a lot of times last year I felt like Georgia was kind of playing 3 defensive ends and an outside linebacker on certain downs as a defensive line. they would have a Chambliss out there, and then they would have, I'm not saying Warren Brinson's not a defensive tackle. He is. Like, he's a 300-pound guy, right? But it's just like they didn't have that true man in the middle. They had a lot of these guys who can play as a 3-tech, but you also see them play as 5-techs a lot too. That is, and when I say a 5-tech, I just mean they're lined up further outside, further towards the offensive tackle. They're lined up in the B gap between the tackle and the guard. That's not a detriment to them. It's actually a compliment to their athleticism and the speed that they possess. But Georgia has got to find some interior pass rush this year. Go back and look at last year, and it just, Jalen Walker and Michael Williams, Smile Mondon, those are your 3 leading pressure getters. Warren Brinson is 4th with 20 pressures. CJ Allen was 5th on the team in pressures as an inside linebacker. He only rushed the passer 35 times last year. Now he turned in 13 pressures on it, but that's kind of indicative of how sort of, I thought, stagnant things got for them on the offensive line at times. So will be interesting to see where they go from here. What you got, Lauren, says, who do you see at safety opposite of Starks, and who's playing star when Georgia plays Clemson? Do you think it will be different when Georgia heads to Tuscaloosa? Good question. I think Dan Jackson is going to start the season at safety. Actually kind of tweeted about him earlier this week. Like, you go back and look at his 2021, which was the last time he was actually healthy. His, snap to target ratio, his snap to reception ratio, very similar to Christopher Smith's. Very good, productive player. I think he's a safe player for Georgia more than anything. I think he is safe. I think you can trust him. I think Georgia feels good when he is out there that he's not going to make a gamble that's going to cost them a touchdown. KJ Bolden is so wildly talented that whenever the light comes on for him, it's going to be over with in a way. Like, he's just going to start taking snaps until he doesn't come off the field. But I do think Dan Jackson is going to kind of be the guy early in the season, and Georgia will rotate Bolden in as things progress. I also, looking at star is really interesting because I think everybody is assuming that's going to be Jonel Aguero. Everybody, I think, kind of wants it to be Aguero because he's got that. He was the number 2 safety in his class. He's got that juice about him. He's got the rep, and he's a really good player, and he's fun to watch, and he does move kind of differently than a lot of guys that you see. But I would not be surprised at all if Ja'Cory Thomas is your starter there at the beginning of the season. I think Thomas is a guy who is kind of shown he's trustworthy and that he's not going to make mistakes. He hasn't played a ton of football as a starter for Georgia or anything like that. He really hasn't played a ton of football, period. But he's been there on the depth chart, I think, in places where people thought other guys were. Like, I think Corey Thomas was really the backup safety all year last year. It was not Aguero. Thomas was the guy to kind of come out there if anything was going on with Starks. And yeah, I expect him to play a lot of football for Georgia this year. That battle between Aguero and Thomas, I think Aguero probably has a little bit more, ceiling to him. But his pass coverage is maybe still, being refined. And I think the truth of the matter is just the key thing that you have to have at star is read and recognition ability. And I'm not sure that they feel totally comfortable that he's got that developed yet at the level that they need him to. So that is what I'm thinking there. Bradley asks, where do we stand with David Sanders? So David Sanders, for those that are not familiar, 5-star offensive tackle recruit. I think there was I think one of the services or, somebody at one point in time way back, kind of predicted him to go to Georgia. That was never something that I heard was a done deal or close to being a done deal. We never, put in a prediction for him at Dog Central or anything like that. I think that David Sanders really likes Georgia. I think he really likes Georgia's coaches. I think that he is confident Georgia can develop him into being a very high draft pick. I also think that because he's been the number one player in his class for a few years now, almost, it feels like, I think he's confident that he's going to get to the NFL no matter where he goes. I think that he is I'll just say it frankly, like, I think that his recruitment is one of the more NIL focused recruitments of this cycle. And so I expect him to sign with a team that is willing to, be the highest bidder, so to speak, in the situation, or, close to it. Georgia is never the highest bidder for anybody. You come to Georgia, I'm not saying that they won't be competitive in certain moments, because they certainly have been for really, players that they consider a real priority, but they are not, they're not out there. They just took 7 offensive linemen in the last class, and the average height and weight of those offensive linemen was 6'7", 340. They're not going to go drop a big bag on David Sanders, who's, he's 6'6", but I think he's still 260, 270. Like, I think there are concerns from certain people about his ability to fully, gain weight and get to the size that he might need to become truly dominant. There are programs like Ohio State, like Tennessee, who are willing to, be the highest bidder, but also see value in just, even if this kid maybe isn't, truly the 5-star that he's rated as, the PR value of us landing the number one, tackle in the class, or maybe the number one player in the class, depending on what rankings you're looking at, the PR value of that, and the way that will, change how our fan base looks at our coach, and make sure that everyone is reassured that we're moving in the right direction. Like, that is worth millions to some. Georgia doesn't really need to do that. I don't think anybody's questioning that Kirby Smart's a good coach, or that he's got his program moving in the right direction. So there you go. That's the answer. Hope that. Point being, I don't think that Georgia's gonna. I don't really look at Georgia as being in that recruitment at this point. I know that he'll have Georgia's hat on his table when he announces that Georgia's a finalist. I don't really think Georgia and David Sanders are, talking that much at this point. So. All right. Jimmy asked if there's any tiebreaker rules for determining SEC championship teams yet. And to my knowledge, there's not. I'm actually kind of wondering if they're going to announce that next week at SEC Media Days. Yeah, so it's apparently they're still developing a new tiebreaker format for this divisionless world that we're now living in. My guess would be that they'll probably announce that next week while we're in Dallas. So I will dig into that for you, Jimmy. And thank you for your question. Boise Dog, any early feedback on true freshman running backs and wide receivers? Who looks ready to play early? Good question. All right. So the interesting thing about Georgia's freshman running backs is that Chauncey Bowens was the only one who enrolled early. Dwight Phillips and Nate Frazier both just kind of got on campus here this summer. And then freshman wide receivers, there was only a couple, right? It was Sokovie White, the 3-star out of Cartersville, who remained ranked as a 3-star, even though he had a wildly productive high school career and kind of tore up every 7-on-7 or recruiting camp that he went to. And then you had Nitro Tuggle, bigger receiver out of Indiana, athletic. I really like his game. I think he'll end up being an important player for Georgia at some point in his career. I think Sokovie White, out of all those names that it's hard because a couple of those guys weren't there for spring practice, but Sokovie White came out of spring practice not just as like one of the freshman skill players who looked most ready to play. He came out of spring practice looking like one of the freshmen who was most ready to play. had a really, really good spring. They really like his game. He is a very technical route runner, and I think he's going to be a very good player for Georgia. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if he kind of works his way into their receiving rotation early in the year. You might see him against Clemson. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. I think at the running back position, Nate Frazier was not there this spring, and I get that, but they are counting on him to play this fall. That is my kind of feeling on it. That's the interpretation that I've gotten from talking to people. They've got ETN, yes. They have Roger Robinson, yes. But Andrew Paul is gone, and Branson Robinson is still working his way back from a really bad knee injury that a lot of guys struggle to come back from at any point. So I think that you're going to see a lot of Nate Frazier this fall. I think they recruited him with that expectation. I think that they have been trying to, kind of prepare him to come in and be ready to get up to speed in fall camp. And I know he's been in Athens lately and working out and getting ready, but I think that is going to be a name that you see on your television a good bit when the season comes around. All right. How is Tyron Ingram Dawkins recovering? This is from Michael. Good, Michael. I mean, I don't have any super detailed answer for you, but it seemed like he was doing well by the end of spring and was kind of back to doing certain things. And I think that he is a very interesting X factor for Georgia this year, because reality is that guy was a 5-star for a reason, and he could be an answer to some of these defensive line problems that we were talking about earlier. All right. Hal asks, given Georgia's depth at tight end and wide receiver coming into this season and ETN's talent as a pass catcher, should we expect them to be less balanced in terms of run and pass than last season? I think the question there is competitive snaps versus non-competitive snaps. I still expect Georgia to blow out, not every, I don't think they'll cruise through their regular season schedule like they did last year. I think they're going to play some tough games on the road at Tennessee, or I'm sorry, not at Tennessee, at Texas and at Alabama and at Ole Miss. They've got all of that coming down the pipe. But I do think that there's going to be plenty of scenarios where Georgia's running out of the clock. Any Kirby Smart team is always going to take defense into heavy consideration. And when you do that, I think that you are going to you're going to want to run the ball. Georgia's got the better quarterback in probably every game they play, or almost every game they play. They've got the better, they got the better offense. They probably have incentive at times to force there to be more possessions in a game. That doesn't mean they will, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that they might be slightly less balanced pass run than last year. They may skew a little more towards pass on early downs. I think that they, especially considering some of the concerns that I think are valid around running back depth, I think you might see a lot of pass attempts that function as an extension of the run game with screens and some of these little flare routes to ETN or whoever's back there. Probably more wide receiver screens. I could see Jacoby White being a big part of their screen game. Same with Dom Lovett, Michael Jackson the second or the third. I'm sorry, Michael Jackson the third, the USC transfer, underrated screen guy. They have a lot of receivers they can throw out there, and they're going to want to get these guys targets. So yeah, I do think that you'll have a little bit higher pass percentage, but I also think that once games get out of hand, you'll probably see that run kind of come back. And so when you get to the end of the season and you look pass first run, I don't know that it'll be a massive discrepancy over what you've come to expect, but I could see, somebody charting competitive non-garbage time snaps and finding that Georgia's more pass heavy in 2024 than they have been in years past. All right. Okay. Last question of the show. If you're still there, thank you for hanging on with us. A lot of questions this week, which is great. It's exciting. I really appreciate the audience participation. I want you guys to come and be part of this. Thinking about trying to find a way to do like a little call-in show format, or have some of you kind of come in here and argue your points, or answer your own questions in a way at times. So if that's something you guys would dig, let me know. Leave a comment on the video or hit me in a DM, or you can send me an email, graham@dogcentral.com. All right. 3 bold predictions for the offense, 3 for defense. Okay. Offense. I think. Let me just look at something real quick. Carson Beck last year was a 3,949 yard passer and played in 14 games. I think that he will be I'll put it this way, because there's probably going to be more games on the schedule. I think through 14 games next year, he will be a 4,500 yard passer. I think he's gonna pass for a lot of yards. You go back last year. I mean, he was humming along really well at times, but 175 against Georgia Tech, 243 against Alabama, 203 against Florida State. I think that in 2024 he'll be approaching or eclipsing the 300 yard mark pretty much weekly with how Georgia functions, unless it's just they start pulling him early from games to protect him because they know that they're going to have an extended playoff ahead, which is possible. I think for offense, for next season, another bold prediction that I would go with is that I do believe Georgia is going to have at least. All right, so last year you had an 800 yard rusher in Edwards, and you had a 700 yard rusher in Milton. I think that you get. I think ETN will eclipse the probably like 1,200, 1,400 yard scenario, and I think that one of these other guys is gonna get up into that 1,000 yard territory as well. I'm not sure if it'll be Robinson or Frazier, but I think you're gonna have a very explosive run game this year, and I think you're gonna see more kind of breakaway style runs than last year. Last year, Georgia had 44 runs of 15 plus yards. To kind of comp that to some other seasons, like when they had, let's see, so yeah, I mean, they had 58 15 plus yards in 2018 when they had Swift and Holyfield back there. I'm sure in 2017 that number was ridiculous. They had 67 in 2017, 67 15 plus yard runs. I don't think they'll have that many. Obviously, that wasn't a very balanced offense, but 2021 Georgia, actually had less 15 plus yard runs than 2024 Georgia. So that'll be interesting to monitor. On the offensive side of the ball, I am going to say that Georgia's leading receiver in 2024 is going to be Dom Lovett. And I do think that he is going to eclipse the 1,000 yard mark. I don't think that will happen probably until like late into the playoff, but all this talk of 1,000 yard receivers, look, guys, I mean, Bowers would have almost certainly gotten past that mark last year if he hadn't gotten hurt, but he did. So what are you going to do? But I think that Georgia will have a 1,000 yard receiver and an 800 yard receiver maybe this year. Actually, I think Lovett could be the 1,000 yard guy just because what he does in the slot is going to be, I think, very much just like one of those kind of extensions of the run games that we were talking about, but they may spread the ball around so much to other places that you don't really have as much output. All right, on defense, I am going to say that Georgia's best corner by the end of the season is Daniel Harris. I think that guy is a freak. He's long, he's big, he's 4'4" kind of speed, and he's got the wingspan of a 6'6" individual, and he's like 200 pounds. Like, I think he is going to end up being a first round pick for sure, but I think he could end up being like a top 10 kind of pick. I think he's got a chance to be that special. So I think Daniel Harris ends the season as your number one corner. Looking at sacks. So last year, Michael had 6, Jalen Walker had 5, Mondon had 4. Last year as a team, Georgia only had 33 sacks. To put that in perspective, 2022 Georgia, like, Georgia's never a team that's going to have a ton of sacks, right? So I shouldn't. Well, that's not true. 2021 Georgia had 63 sacks as a team, which is an insane number. 2023 Georgia, like I just said, just 33 sacks as a team, 30 less sacks than that 2021 season. I'm going to say that Georgia hits the 50 sack mark this year. I think that Michael Williams and Jalen Walker are, if those two guys are used the way that I think they will be, and I think the way they should be, to be frank, where both are coming off the edges in certain third down situations, as well as Damon Wilson rotating into that scenario as well. I think Michael moving out to outside linebacker, getting to rush as a stand-up passer on third downs, I think he's a 10-sack guy, easy. I wouldn't be shocked if he becomes a 14, 15-sack guy at all. Walker, same deal. I think he can be a 10-sack guy. I think Damon Wilson should be a 7, 8, 9-sack kind of guy, maybe more depending on his rep share. And then I think Georgia figures with CJ Allen back there and Mondon, and people forget that Mondon back in 2022, there was a large portion of the season where he was actually leading Georgia in pressures. Not by the end. Jalen Carter and Michael kind of came on, but he's very, very good pass rusher, and he actually has the ability to rush off the edge too. I don't think he will, because they got Jalen Walker to do that now. He's a little better at it than Mondon was, but I think you're going to have a big banner year, kind of a renaissance year in the front seven for Georgia from a pass rush standpoint. The other defensive prediction that I'm going to make is that I think, let me see, what did they average a game last year? Sorry for looking this up in real time. All right. 2023 Georgia was 7th in the nation in opponent points per game allowed. They gave up 16.3 points per game. Ohio State was second at 11.6. Michigan was first at 10.4. I think there's been a lot of people that have kind of been talking about Ohio State's defense and how good it's going to be. And ironically enough, everybody's kind of talking about Georgia's offense and how good it's going to be. And there's sort of this role reversal there. I think that Georgia's defense is going to emerge. I think looking at what they've got on this roster, yes, there are some spots like Star that I still have questions about. Who plays safety next to Malachi, I have questions about. But those questions, the answers to all those questions are choosing between one of 4 or 5 blue chip recruits that you have in the program. There is an overwhelming amount of talent on this team, especially on defense. And I think there's an overwhelming amount of this defensive talent that's kind of maturing and sort of hitting that spot where this is their money year and this is their chance to go and show the world that they should be a first or second round NFL draft pick. So I think that this Georgia defense is going to be I think they'll get back to kind of how they do business in terms of stopping the run. last year, they just were not solid in stopping the run. They gave up, see, they were 16th in the country and gave up 112.2 rush yards per game, which is not by any means terrible, but you start going back. 2022, Georgia led the nation, allowed 81.2 rush yards per game. 21, Georgia, second in the nation. They gave up 80.1 rush yards per game. And then 2019, Georgia only allowed 78.9 rush yards a game. 2018, Georgia was not a very good defense. Frankly, they gave up 137 rush yards a game. That was, where did that rank? 32nd in the country. I think that's the worst Kirby rush defense. If I'm not mistaken. 2017 Georgia, they gave up more than I thought. They were 22nd in the country, 129.5. And then the COVID year, just honestly, it doesn't really matter or count, but that was actually their best rushing defense in terms of yards per game allowed that they ever had. They only gave up 72.3 that season. I think that Georgia's, so, to recap here what I just told you, because I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you at once. Georgia's rush defenses have either been basically like at the 80 yards per game allowed like range. Like they've been kind of right there, like 81 or 78 or, 79, or they've been ballooning up into that 120 to 130 range on a couple occasions. Last year was sort of the only time we've ever really seen them in the middle. They were 112.2. So, that wasn't terrible, but the last 3 games of the season, they allowed 127.3 rush yards a game. And we know that the majority of those did not come against Florida State because the Seminoles, ironically, they had 63 yards rushing in that game, which they also allowed 63 points to Georgia in. I think that Georgia gets back to doing business the way that business is supposed to be done on the ground. I think that CJ Allen is going to be kind of go from being a really promising, exciting player who everyone knows has a ton of talent and promise to being like on the path to a transcendent kind of player. Like, I think that by the time things wrap up, he could be the closest thing to Roquan that we've seen under Kirby besides Roquan. And I include Nakobe Dean in that. I include, obviously Nakobe, different body type than Roquan. If I just talk about that level of excellence at inside linebacker, I think he's going to reach it. And I think that Georgia's going to play pissed off this year more than anything. They thought that they were the best team in the country last year. They might have been right about that thought, to be honest. I think if healthy, they certainly go on to win a national title. I think they're going to play this year like we're coming to get what's ours and what we are owed in a way, but we're going to go earn it at the same time. And I think that Georgia's rushing defense in 2024, I'm going to go on record. My bold prediction is that they allow less than 90 yards per game on the ground, even with that schedule. And you didn't ask for, you asked for 3 offensive and 3 defensive bold predictions. I'm going to give you one other kind of team related bold prediction before we go out. I think that Georgia is going to go to Austin, Texas in October, and I think they're going to blow Texas out. I think they're going to rip that defense apart. I don't think Quinn Ewers is very good. He only completed 16 passes of 20-plus yards last year. To give you some perspective, that's the same number of passes of 20-plus yards that Graham Mertz completed last year, except for he did it on 8 less attempts than Ewers did. Ewers doesn't have A.D. Mitchell or Xavier Worthy anymore, and he only, still with that receiving core, Tavian Sanders, all these really talented players, 16 20-plus yard passes. You look at teams that beat Georgia, they've got quarterbacks that can hit explosives in the pass game and stretch the field. Georgia, even when they aren't the greatest, maybe there's times where they haven't had the greatest technical cover corners or, whatever it is, but they always tackle you when you catch the ball. They do not miss tackles in the back end. I don't think they're going to start in 2024, and I think they're going to go to Texas, and they are going to give them a rude welcoming to the SEC. I know it won't be their first SEC game, but in a lot of ways, it'll be kind of that first premier SEC game. And part of this prediction is, yeah, I think Georgia's going to be good, but I also just think Texas is going to be very overhyped. Not going to go down the road of Alabama, Ole Miss, all these other big games yet, but we're going to start getting into all that preview content here after SEC Media Days. I am going to be in Dallas next week, so please follow me on Twitter. Check my stuff out. I'll be posting updates and posting videos. I'll actually be posting like press conference videos and little stuff here and there on the channel. I'm sure I'll do some live recordings or shows or whatever from out there. Probably find some guests to join us. So if you're not subscribed to the channel already, please do that. And shout out to Sacred Grove. Thank you for all your participation in the chat. It's fun seeing your reactions in real time. And that's a bold prediction right there. He says, I think Joseph Jonah Ajonye is going to have one of those Mikel type first seasons. I'll tell you that if that happens, then 2024 Georgia is going to, it's going to be a bear. All right. Hope you guys are having a good summer, like I said in the open, and stay tuned to our stuff. We're getting close to fall camp. Got some big, very big announcements coming up here in the next week or two, and just stay tuned, and we'll share them when we get here. But until then, y'all stay cool, enjoy your swimming pools, and talk to you later.